DevilNeverCry.
What is up, everybody? It is me, DevilNeverCry, and as they say, the devil's certainly in the details. In today's video, we're going to be going over a few of the details in the original Devil May Cry that you may have missed. I wouldn't necessarily say these details are hidden, though they could definitely be considered so if you haven't been keeping an eye out for them, and though some of them might be at this point fairly outdated and sort of standard in the industry, this game is over 20 years old, so seeing some of these features implemented in a game that old, at least to me, seems pretty cool. Without further ado though, let's get straight into it. The first really cool detail I want to touch upon is Ebony and Ivory, specifically their firing animation. Every time you press the gun button, Dante will fire off a shot. Of course, successive shots will alter which gun Dante fires with, but that's not the cool part. If you take a closer look at Ebony and Ivory every time they fire, you'll see that the developers have gone to great lengths to mimic a real firearm. As Dante fires one of his handguns, he's met with recoil. The slide springs back, exposing the ejection port, at which point a spent cartridge comes flying out. This spent cartridge then ricochets off whatever surface it lands on before coming to a rest and ultimately disappearing. All of this process is accompanied by amazing sound design, from the sound of Ebony and Ivory firing away to the minute detail of the cartridge actually landing on a surface. The firing animation also features a realistic muzzle flash and smoke leaking from the barrel of the weapon. However, thanks to how Capcom have handled the porting process for DMC and the Devil May Cry HD collection, the firing animation is missing a bunch of blur effects. There was motion blur added to Ebony and Ivory to signify just how fast Dante's firing and controlling the recoil, and it was also supposed to help signify the heat dissipating from the weapons. This effect is still present in the PS2 versions, but cannot be seen in any of the HD collections. This attention to detail can also be seen in the shotgun's firing animation, as similar to Ebony and Ivory, these spent cartridges come flying out, ricocheting around the surroundings before disappearing entirely. Another cool detail I'd quickly like to touch upon is that Dante's aiming animation differs depending on which direction he is moving. It may not seem like much, but it's thanks to these little details that DMC oozes style the way it does. Moving on to another obscure detail and potential throwback is the appearance of a downed fighter plane in the underwater section of Devil May Cry, specifically the Broken Bridge. If you take a real close look at the background when underwater, you'll notice a downed fighter plane. This plane suspiciously resembles the plane seen in Capcom's 1984 arcade game 1942. It's a scrolling shooter arcade game which puts you in the middle of World War II as a fighter pilot fighting against enemy planes. It certainly isn't a coincidence that this plane crashed at Malay Island. Next up, an interesting detail about the Sin enemies. If you happen to find yourself in the first floor hallway of Malay Castle, you'll notice that the enemies make their way to Dante by coming out of the paintings found on the walls. This is a pretty cool throwback to when you first meet these enemies, as the cutscene has you watch them literally crawl out of a painting. Moving on, we come to one of my favorite details about Devil May Cry, and that is the foreshadowing the game gives you if you take the time to examine your surroundings. As an example, if you read some of the books in Mission 2's library, you'll get foreshadowing as to what's about to happen in Mission 3. Reading the book gives you the following information. Something about a strange occurrence in the cathedral of this castle is written. It happened on a hot, humid night. The columns twisted and the statue of a god disappeared. We quickly sealed the cathedral in the hope that someone righteous with a strong heart would come save us. Dante just so happens to read this excerpt from this book and still decides to waltz on into the cathedral, where he's of course met by the twisting and writhing, pulsating columns and none other than hot, humid Phantom himself. I wouldn't necessarily call Dante righteous, but I would say he has a rather strong heart. However, regardless of how convoluted the flow of time is on Malay Island, I think Dante's arrived a little too late to make a difference to the inhabitants who probably died a horrible death. You can find details and information on Malay Island everywhere throughout the game if you know where to look. I might even do a separate video going over some of the history of the island if people want me to. But I digress. Moving on to another detail, this is one that most of you will probably know, and that is Dante's different idle animations. If you stand around Malay Island long enough eventually without touching the controller, Dante will play out a little idle animation to keep himself busy as he waits for you to move on. And the idle animations are different depending on which firearm you have equipped. As you can see here, Dante twirls around Ebony and Ivory if you have them equipped, and if you have either the grenade launcher or the shotgun, Dante will casually sling it up across his shoulder. Up next, shadows. And no, I don't mean demons, I mean Dante's literal shadow. If you take a look at the shadow, you'll see that it doesn't quite resemble Dante himself. And that's because this shadow seems to be based off a beta version of Dante, which featured a short coat as opposed to the trench coat that he has in the game. And going one step further, take a look at the legendary Dark Knight's shadow. Does it seem familiar? It should. That shadow is based off of Spada's silhouette, and conveniently enough, when you use your Devil Trigger as the legendary Dark Knight, you turn into Spada. Moving on to another detail that is quite obvious, though might not be if you haven't attempted any of the secret missions in Devil May Cry, is the inclusion of the critical hit system, which is only seen in this game. As an example here, you'll see Dante channel his own inner anime power and destroy this Sin Scissors with a single shot from Ebony and Ivory. You can't utilize critical hits against all of the enemies, but some of them will have a specific weakness which will allow you to destroy them in one single hit. Those of you that have attempted Secret Mission 1 will know just how annoying getting these critical hits can be at times. Continuing on, did you know it's possible that you can meet Mundus, the final boss of Devil May Cry, in the very first mission of the game? Well, I mean meet very loosely, in that you can examine a giant statue dedicated to a god that the Castellans worship in the Great Hall of Malay Castle. It's in the first room of the castle that Dante enters, and funnily enough, Dante doesn't think much of the statue when he goes to examine it. And with all that said and done, that brings us to the end of this video. Let me know your thoughts on these details down in the comments below. How many of these did you spot yourself? Of course, if you enjoyed today's video, do be sure to leave a like and consider subscribing, as it all helps out the channel. With all that said and done, it has been me, DevilNeverCry. I'd like to thank all of you for watching, and as always, I'll see you all next video.